at work. I do other stuff more where it's what I learned in microbiology, like lab, like streaking for singles on auger plates and like gram staining and like identifying different colonies and stuff like that as of right now.
PCR specifically, I kind of spent like my entire time in undergrad trying to get PCR to work. And on like human genes, it was super hard and it never worked. I ended up just trying like a million different techniques. There's like a bunch of different ways to like start PCR with different temperatures to like really get it if your gene is hard to amplify. I've never done it out of a virus, so or like viral genome. So I don't know that specifically, but I don't know. Just keep trying to optimize.
Maybe watch maybe like videos like maybe Khan Academy or like other like science based videos can like make you understand better. I don't know. It could help. I watch those videos on like other topics and stuff that like I'm not 100% on, and they're really helpful. So maybe there is one for PCR.
Okay, so moving right along. Um, this is kind of, it might branch into like two separate questions at this point. If you're in school, did you take any like tests for the admission process, and what did you do to prepare for that? Or versus if you're in a job right now, what was kind of like the training process like, or sort of training you to be at the job type of thing? Yeah.
I took the GRE to get into grad school. That was in 2016, and I feel like it was pretty much required everywhere I looked back then. But I'm seeing now that that's like less and less necessary, so that's probably not as relevant anymore. When I took it, even if there's still some places that do require it, but if you end up taking it, I just did basic prep work, like mostly just online with free guides. I wouldn't waste money on like a prep class or anything because the guides helped me just fine. It's a very like the test has nothing to do with what you've learned like in college. The math is like high school level, and it's just like vocab after that. If you do end up having to take it, that's like I would do like mostly just brushing up on like math formulas from high school, but I think it's less common now. So I think mostly they're just looking at more like a whole picture of people as an applicant rather than GRE scores. But and I don't know any place that required subject tests, and I probably wouldn't. I don't have any advice on those, but yeah.
So basically, how did you apply to grad school? Like, how did you look for like scholarships and stuff like that?
I basically just looked. I had an idea that I wanted to stay in like the rough geographic area, like eastern half of the US. And I just looked at schools that were in like near me that had like strong genetics or micro programs. And I just looked to see if there were any projects that interested me. I literally just like Googled schools I was familiar with, schools in the area. I'm only about 3 hours away from where I did undergrad. So I was just looking for programs that looked like they would interest me. Um, as far as scholarships, grad school for me has been funded completely, and I would encourage people to not go to a program that isn't funded. You should not be paying to go to grad school. If you're doing a PhD, masters are a little bit different, but I would even argue you shouldn't be paying to do a master's either. They should be paying you to teach, or you should be on a fellowship. I wouldn't go to a program that isn't funded. So as far as scholarships, I didn't really need any because the tuition is covered, and I was paid to teach, and now I'm just paid to research. So yeah.
We love that. For a job training, so everyone does things differently. Like I'm sure everyone has streaked an auger plate before. The way that we were taught in microlab at OU specifically was in threes. When I got to training, they do it in quadrants. So I mean, it's like, oh, okay, like this is weird, but it's like an easy adjustment because it's the same basic concept. Training wise, since I had like a good background on like knowing what I'm reading on a slide, knowing the difference between gram-positive cocci, gram-negative bacilli, stuff like that, I think it was easier for me to grasp the whole process in total. And it was like I got trained on what I'm doing like pretty easily and pretty fast just from having that kind of background. But it like even if you go into like the people work there that don't have micro backgrounds, and like it's not too hard to grasp the concept of it. But the training process for me at least was easy because I already had previous experience and education for it.
Awesome. So the next part is kind of related to the last question. But I'm guessing both of you guys kind of had some sort of like interview process. So if you want to talk about being interviewed for wherever you're at, and maybe like if you had some sort of like letters of recommendation that went into that, like who did you get those from? That type of thing, interviews.
I did interview at 3 places and they were all really different. So it's all really dependent on the school. If you're going to like a really highly competitive program, you'll probably end up doing like a very formal interview where you sit down with like the board of admissions. I did that for one place. You'll usually end up sitting with like professors that are on the admissions committee. And you might also be interviewing like specifically with someone you might be working with. When I interviewed here, it was a little less formal because I was specifically wanted to work for Ronan, so I just ended up like sitting down with him for a while. And the other school I went to was kind of the same way. So they're really different depending on the schools. Most like any super competitive program is going to be formal. But yeah, it was mostly like what you'd expect, questions about the research I was doing in undergrad, the courses I'd taken in undergrad, what did I want out of grad school, what did I want to do in my future, basically stuff like that. Every place I applied to wanted letters of recommendation. Most of them wanted 3. I got them from the PI I worked with doing undergrad research, another professor I just had a bunch of classes with, and my supervisor where I did some volunteer work. So just try to get like the person I did research with, like an academic one, and then someone that was like outside of like academia. That was what I did.
Yep. So basically, how long before do you have to get them to write the reference letter? Because in my case, I'm gonna apply to grad school like next fall in fall 2022, so that would be next year. Basically, I'm now taking an organic chem class that I would kind of like want to ask my professor whether he is willing to write like some sort of recommendation letters for me.
Yeah, usually I would, when you start the application process is usually when I'd ask. So I think I started, usually applications are due like December or January, and then for you to start like in August. So I would probably start asking like the beginning of the semester that you're going to be like applying. So if the applications are due like December, January, start asking like August or September. It doesn't hurt though if you're like close with a professor just to ask if they'd be willing to do something in the future, just so it's on their radar. But usually when you're filling out an application, it'll tell you how long the professor has, and it'll just automatically email them.
So what GPA did you go to grad school with? Because I'm currently trying to make it up to like a 3.7 to 3.8. So do I have a chance if I get there?
Oh yeah, it depends on the program. Obviously, the minimum for most programs is a 3.0. If you're below that, you might have some issues, but as long as you're above that, you shouldn't have GPA based issues. If you're trying to get into like a super prestigious program and you're up against people that have like perfect GPAs, I mean, I don't know, but you're totally fine with a GPA of 3.7 or something like that. You probably would be able to, that's not going to rule you out from anywhere. Most GPAs that are like over a 3.5 won't rule you out, and nothing will rule you out if it's above a 3. Grad school GPAs are like much less stringent than like med school. I mean, it's going to help your application if it's higher, but it's not going to rule you out. And I agree. I just saw a comment that it's based on research. It's more based on like research experience, and like if you have like a passion for a specific project, they're much more going to look at like you as like a researcher rather than your grades.
Yeah, that would be good.
So my interview process was kind of the same as Rachel's. I also want to add that in mine they gave me like scenarios where like how would you, or like what would you do in this like type of scenario, like if you mess something up, like what would you do so you wouldn't make that same mistake again, and just stuff like that. So I don't know if they always ask that, but for me at least, like be prepared to ask or answer those types of questions. Like if you were put in that position, what would you do? And for letters of rec, for Cleveland Clinic, it was online. I would just send a link to the people that I wanted to write a letter of rec for me. And I just chose people, they're my mentors from my research lab, along with what, like Rachel said, like someone else that like knew me well enough to write me a good letter of rec outside of academics.
Kemi, when you say advisors or like people that you worked with in the lab for letters of recommendation, was that like professors specifically, or did you also ask like grad students?
So the lab that I worked in, he wasn't really a professor. I worked with John Kopchik. He was like the head person, but like my actual mentor that like hired me and like trained me was just a PhD scientist person. Like they were both not professors. But again, like obviously you can use a professor as a letter rec, but you don't need that. So I think anyone that has anything good to say about you and your work ethic and anything is a good person to ask.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, great job everybody that has hopped in to ask questions. But my next question is kind of more broad. And it's basically like, how has life been either as a grad student or working your job, like in the context of a pandemic? Has that changed what you're doing, and like how does it look different?
So I think day to day, I really like my job. I like what I do. During a pandemic, it definitely changed. We were like out of the lab for a few months during the initial lockdown, and that was really hard. Because most of our work, especially if you're like focused at doing a PhD that has any kind of lab work, you have to be in person. Very like there's not a ton you can do online. That's just pretty much specific to what we do. That's not true of everyone. But for me, it was hard to be out of the lab for a while. But once we've gotten back in, it's been pretty much back to normal. I just mostly get in and do my lab work and get out now, which most of the time we would just stay all day and do meetings. So that's a little bit different, but overall, I feel like it's not a massive change from what it was before. Now that we've kind of like adjusted to life in the pandemic, the only major difference is I'm not spending like an 8-hour day like with meetings and stuff. I just try to spend like the least amount of time possible like hanging around other people. So it's not crazy different.
I would say I don't know if I'm like too affected by it because I just recently started, so like it's like a year later, but I know the people that I've like talked to, like we have to wear masks all the time in the lab obviously, and we work in a hospital, so like we're just always around people, and I think that's what we need to be more careful about. But the good thing is like all the employees were offered the vaccine and stuff, so that's something that good that came out of it, at least working for Cleveland Clinic. And I know like the workload like is very heavy just because of the pandemic. And I think them scheduling and trying to keep the whole like social distancing thing is harder because they can't have as many people work in the lab as they want to. So it's kind of understaffed, which makes the workload even more. But other than that, in having to wear masks, I don't think I can personally say I know like the whole drastic change of the whole lab itself because I wasn't there from when it first started.
Oh, we got a question in the chat. What does a typical work week look like? I think in Kemi's lab specifically, but Rachel could also answer this question. Like, what does your typical daily schedule look like week to week?
Well, I check. Well, first, everyone always checks the schedule every day because some people call off, so you might have to be put in different places. But the thing that I do, I work with blood samples. So what I have to do is just make gram stains from them, see if there's any organisms on their slide, and then plate the blood in Auger. Usually in the beginning of the week, it's not too bad because the weekends are kind of slow, but like towards the end, like probably tomorrow and Friday, like it's gonna be bad. Like the workload for some reason is always more. And I think it's because more doctors schedule surgeries at the end of their week than in the beginning. So it all just depends on obviously patients and how many people are coming in to get checked up on.
My work week is really different now than it was when I first started. Now that I'm done with classes and I don't teach anymore because we got a grant and now my boss pays me to just research all the time. So basically I just go in the lab and I do my like PhD research all day. That's different every day, depending on what I need to get done. So we're kind of like a molecular pathogenesis lab. So I do a lot of like virulence assays and we do a lot of like PCR and stuff on a day-to-day basis. When I first started, I was taking classes for 2 years, so I'd have to do that. And I was also teaching classes. I taught Gen Micro here for a while, and I taught a bunch of different labs here. So that was pretty different. And I would say I had to end up splitting like 50-50 between like research and everything else, like my first 2 or 3 years here.
I think we got a question kind of relating to like work-life balance. How did you guys, I guess both of you kind of, how do you keep your life organized with all the things that you have going on?
It's easier now, definitely, that I have less stuff going on. In the beginning, it is a lot, especially if you end up teaching and you will be probably taking classes at the beginning in grad school. Definitely you focus less on research in the beginning because you're probably just figuring out your project, and it's just easier to like sort of compartmentalize and know that like in my first 2 years, I'm not going to get a ton done in the lab. It's just kind of easier to set goals more like in like talk with your advisor and just make sure that they're on the same page where your first 2 years are more like getting acclimated, taking your classes and maybe doing like some introductory work. And then you're really like research heavy and maybe you're like third or fourth year. So it's kind of easier if you like set realistic goals in the beginning to just be like, these are my like years where I'll be focusing less on lab work and stuff like that.
I'm muted. For me, I think it's easier now that I don't have classes. I don't have to like stress about studying. Well, I'm studying for the MCAT, which is obviously stressful, but like actually like taking courses, I think it's easier to balance when you're not like overloaded with homework and studying. But like I said that I'm studying for the MCAT, I have to try and like do it like for kind of like force myself to get it done because you work an 8-hour shift and I just want to go home and like sleep. But what I usually do, I stay like a couple hours after work and study there. So like the environment is kind of the same, and I'm like still in like the um motion of like working and like getting stuff done. And then I go home, because if I go home first, I just want to not do anything. But other than that, like I still hang out with my friends like normal. Like everything is the same, I guess. But yeah, I think you just need to prioritize stuff, obviously. But other than that, it's very manageable.
This is kind of the last like main question that I had. But like this is more, I think, kind of becoming an issue in like academia as of late. But do you guys feel like you're doing okay, like mental health wise? Are you happy with what you're doing? Like, do you like being where you are? Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I feel like anybody in grad school is going to have like lows because it is a really hard thing to do. You're getting anybody who gets an advanced degree, it's a ton of work, no matter where you end up going. And there are hard days, just like anything, just like even in undergrad. I would say that the number one thing is if you have a supportive advisor, it's going to be a million times easier. It's all about picking the person that will be able to support you and understand if you have a bad day and not try to push you beyond like the limits of your mental health. There's, I mean, definitely times when I've been super overwhelmed and I've had to like step back from things. Mental health in academia, especially like in grad school, is like people say it's pretty bad. I don't find that all the time. I feel like it's mostly because people are in labs where a lot of advisors like don't have any kind of training to manage people, or like especially manage students who are young and in their first like professional move in grad school. I think it's mostly just a lack of like mental health training for like bosses, and it's not their fault either because they're not given the training. But if you can find the person who is supportive of you and who like knows how to handle just like management, I think that's a huge step. So mostly I would say it's I'm doing pretty good.
I would say the same. Definitely working a full-time job is very stressful in itself, and I couldn't even imagine doing that while also being in school, because that's just like an overload of stuff. But other than that, like I think having like people around you that also have good mental health and are keeping each other like in check, and you know just being happy. But yeah, other than that, other than just the pandemic itself, just bring everyone's mood down. Some good came from it.
Yeah, for sure. That was kind of all the like sort of guided questions that I had to facilitate. Do you guys feel like you have anything else important that you want to say that I didn't really ask about?
Someone did ask a question.
Oh, okay.
For Rachel. In the chat, sorry. You're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, the question is, what's the difference between completing a master's or a PhD as far as career options? It really varies. If you're looking to more do like, if you're looking to be a professor, if you're looking to like go into academia, you are probably going to need a PhD for something like that. If you're looking to be just a research scientist, usually a master's is okay for something like that. It depends on the lab and the position, which is just like you work in a lab and you do research under someone else. A lot of like industry jobs, depending on the job, they can take master's or PhD work. It really depends on the type of career you want. If you're looking to be someone in like a management position, like if you're looking to either manage an industry lab or manage a research lab, that's probably going to need a PhD.
Do either of you have, I guess, like your like one piece of advice that you would give to anybody here, or kind of like your final thoughts, anything that I didn't touch on that you think is important to note?
Yeah, I think basically the most important thing is finding a project and a team that you're passionate about. The number one thing that keeps anyone going, in grad school, is just if you're interested in the project. If you're even iffy about something that's being proposed to you to work on, I would say not to pursue that. You have to be really interested in it to want to wake up every morning and do something like that. So if you're iffy on any part of it, I would say try to find something that might be a better fit. As long as you really like what you're doing, most people, I think, will have a pretty good time doing something in grad school, especially in science.
I would have said the same thing, and especially when you're working full time, like do something that you love doing, because you're gonna be exhausted working 40 hours a week, going in and being like, oh, I have to do this again. So get into something that you enjoy doing so you can look forward to your day instead of it dragging on and you're just waiting to go home.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Anybody out there have any questions? Don't be shy. You can also put them in the chat as well if you don't want to speak. I get it.
I have a question. For like medical lab careers, did you have to get certified? And then what was that process like if you did?
I am not certified yet. I do plan on being, and Cleveland Clinic, I know, offers courses and they pay for it for you to get certified. So that is amazing. And it's a very like competitive thing right now because of COVID, and like they can't have as many people getting trained and being taught. But yeah, they'll pay for your certification.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Kemi, I had a question for you. So in the lab, like was working with like doing the blood work stuff, was that just what they needed you for? Or did you have like different options or diagnostic tools or areas to choose from?
That's what I applied for, but usually it takes like a couple weeks to get, we call them benches. It takes a couple weeks to get trained on that. So the blood is separate from the gram stain thing that I was talking about. You do gram stain on the blood bench, but gram stains is a whole separate thing too. And I'm slowly getting trained on more and more things, but I think I started with that because they needed more people on that specific area.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else got any questions? Don't be shy. Well, if there's no more questions, we could always, end a little bit early. Nobody loves being on Zoom anymore a year into the pandemic. But Kemi and Rachel, would you guys be willing to like have us share your email with people in case like they have more questions that come up? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
So we'll do that. So if people think of more questions like later or tomorrow, send it their way. Last thing I just have is like a quick announcement for OU people. It looks like we are going to get approved to do Auger Art on April 14th. And I sent a second email today with like a sign up sheet because we have to get a head count so we can like spread everybody out 6 feet away from each other. So we got to get lab space. So look at that email, sign up for that, and it'll be super fun. but that's pretty much my only announcement. But yeah, if nobody has anything else, that's about it. And you guys are free to head on out. Have a good evening in that